Hey there, folks. So welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture, and today we're going to be talking about the newest album from the Wombats called Beautiful People Will Ruin Your Life. I said there were a lot of albums coming out in February I was anticipating, and this is the next one on the docket, and that might surprise some people, given that the Wombats don't exactly have a sterling critical reputation. Oh, they won critics over in a big way with their debut, A Guide to Love, Loss, and Desperation, with its nervy brand of post-punk and indie rock that would seem a little bit wilder than many would expect, but they took steps towards conventionality on their next two albums, even venturing more into synth pop. But here's the thing, even despite me thinking that their debut is probably still their best work, their 2015 project Glitterbug was remarkably strong, with huge hooks, a ton of energy, and a refreshing amount of maturity in their songwriting and framing. Hell, that album and a few songs on it made my year-end list of the best songs and the best albums of 2015. But I will say I was a little bit worried about this album. The early singles hadn't really stuck with me, and let's be honest, the 80s inspired synth pop that drove Glitterbug was nowhere close to the same preeminence it was 3 years ago, which likely means the band evolved again and changed their sound, but into what? Part of the Wombats' fundamental appeal was their energy and their ability to swerve, but they're a band that's been together a fairly long time and age will start to creep in. And while the Wombats have always got some pretty mixed reviews, this time it looked that slowing down had hurt them even more. In other words, even though I had a lot of high hopes that this would kick a lot of ass, I was also setting myself up for some possible disappointment. I was expecting the best, but also knowing the worst could come. So, okay, what did we get with this? Well, alright. This is the sort of record that puts me in a very conflicted position, because the more listens that I gave it, the more I was absolutely convinced it was the natural outgrowth of what we heard on Glitterbug. The grooves, they were tighter than ever. The whirling late 80s synth pop sheen had been refined down a lot tighter into punchy new wave and post-punk. In comparison with the wild emotionality of their last record, this certainly did feel a little bit more mature, a more of a natural progression, so why the hell don't I like it nearly as much? Look, I'm not saying that it's bad, and I wouldn't even call it their worst album when you have this modern glitch to look at, but what it reminded me more of than most was that last Beck album, Colors. Hazy, ever so slightly melancholic, wishing the party had come easier like it had in the past, and sadly, kind of a big disappointment, not nearly as good as I was hoping. And here's the thing, when you take a look at a lot of the content, so much of it feels like a natural extension of Glitterbug that I am inclined to dig for the same emotional gut punch and resonance that made that record work so damn well. The parties described are still utterly wild and careening on the edge of control, and frontman Matthew Murphy, he's gonna make sure you see all those details in Technicolor, a fair few of them good, but a lot more of them pretty bad. And even though he's now happily married, the fights that characterize songs like Lemon to a Knife Fight, or even the confused affection at the root of I don't know why I like you, but I do, they still highlight some of that same tension. And yeah, I've always liked this style of songwriting too. It's colorful, it paints a vivid picture, it's artsy, but in a pretty accessible way. But you also rapidly realize that without a lot of significant differentiation in the ideas underscoring the writing and the scenarios put forward, it can really start to run together like a lot of these parties, especially when it feels like the dramatic stakes don't really have the same weight. And a huge part of that comes in the production and the sound as well. And look, credit where it's due. On paper, this was a direction that had a ton of potential to really click for me, going back to the tight, nervy grooves that made the Wombats so damn potent, maybe even stepping towards post-punk, taking all that wild energy that characterized Glitterbug and refining it and focusing into something sharper. This should work. And yet, with every single listen through this album, which clocks in at less than 40 minutes, and man, it feels shorter than that, it feels like something was missing here. See, I'll be the first to admit that from its delivery alone, Glitterbug could feel a little shallow or melodramatic. Let's go back to that. But it also knew how to lean into it and play to the Wombats' natural tendency to go for big, wild emotionality. It wasn't as ragged as A Guide to Love, Loss, and Desperation, but by cranking up the huge synth leads and the roaring guitars, it captured a similar emotional head rush that what's made that record so damn intoxicating, so damn fun, even despite the darker undercurrent. But despite following the very close themes, when you strip it down to slick, cool, bassy grooves and overall a much more melancholic vibe in the composition, it places the darkness that was just subtext on Glitterbug as much more text. And I'm not sure the directness really helps or places the band's natural sense of melodramatic exuberance. Or put it another way, it killed a lot of the vigor and natural sense of humor that the band has when you have songs like Ice Cream and I Don't Know Why I Like You But I Do, that in terms of melodic progression and tone of the groove, they wouldn't be that far removed from a Joy Division song, or a track like Black Flamingo with that blaring lead guitar melody that reminds me of those mid to late 2000s indie rock bands that would take all their party vibes ironically, which doesn't remotely align with the emotional core of the Wombats at all. And it doesn't help matters that you can tell that Matthew Murphy just isn't really giving the same huge performance he did on Glitterbug. I mean, he's fine on this. He's certainly capable of conveying this brand of subtler anxiety, but with so much of this album tilting towards minor tones, again, it's not really playing to the band's strengths as a whole, and that just becomes incredibly frustrating. And now that's not saying there aren't songs that I like on this, because there are. Hell, bassist Tord Overland Knudsen, he's working overtime on this record. He deserves all the credit in the world for his work here. The grooves are consistently excellent, damn near the best part of the album. And when you have the greater swell that comes off the spikes of the guitar on Cheetah Tongue, which I like, the deeper revving swell of Turn almost reminded me a little bit of Glitterbug, the jagged, jangling bounce of White Eyes, or the old-fashioned but solid guitar lick driving Dip You in Honey. You know what, I like those, but this is where we run into another problem that I've already referenced. The length. As I said, this is a pretty short album, and the reason it feels so short is that many of these songs just feel undercooked, lacking any sort of significant bridge or solo on a lot of them. Or in the case of a track like Lethal Combination, it's like a blocky stumble into modern reverb-saturated indie pop. Hell, with as much reverb touch as the vocals and guitars have on this record, it's hard not to slot this project uncomfortably close to a lot of that sound that got really popular in the mainstream about 3 years ago. Just another thing that's cutting in on the band's natural buoyancy. And that's only before you get the flip side on I Only Wear Black, which I tried to like until I realized it sounds like a late period Panic at the Disco song, and yet somehow bereft of the theatricality, I know that the Wombats can actually deliver. But as a whole, man, the more I listened through this album, the more I was just let down by it. For me, it's the first real disappointment of 2018, and sadly one I can't exactly blame the band for. It's more on me. Clearly the band has matured. They're settling more into a different comfort zone. But what made the Wombats such a thrilling act for me was how they would careen outside of that comfort zone with the big emotions in order to back it up. And you know what? If those emotions aren't for the band in the same well, that happens. That's on me to mature with the band, and I guess I'm just not aligning on the same wavelength as they are. And make no mistake, they still are talented. So if this is just a transition towards becoming an indie veteran mainstay in the vein of Spoon, I'd definitely be intrigued. But as this album, for me, they just aren't all the way there. And as such, it's getting a very strong 6 out of 10, but the recommendation is for Wombats fans first. Everybody else, go check out A Guide to Life, Less and Desperation, and then follow up with Glitterbug, and then maybe this if you're curious, and even then, I can't quite promise you'll be satisfied. Just saying. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Not a lot to say about this. I wanted to have more to say about it, just not a lot to it, sadly. If you guys want to check it out and buy it, links in the description below. Got the poll up there for you diehard Wombats fans, see whether or not you liked it or not, but again, this is just kind of a disappointment for me. I know they're capable of better. Beyond that, if you guys want to support me or get involved in my scheduling process, link to my Patreon is right over there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote on my schedule, and once a week for the higher tier contributors, you guys get to add albums, movies, or even a top 10 list to that schedule. And if you want to see what's on that schedule right now, link is to my Instagram where I post it whenever it gets updated. Till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.